All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's panel discussion on digital technologies as enablers of the circular economy transition. I'm Pavitra. I think many of you here in the room today have been a part of the rest of our series as well, in at least one or two of the other webinars. So it's actually a delight to see you back in the room. Before we move on any further, I would like to take this opportunity to thank EU-REI for supporting this work and enabling most of it. I think we've been pretty privileged to bring quite a few conversations around the circular economy to particularly the Indian audience in what is probably the first set of discussions around these topics. A big thank you also to our panelists for joining us here today. It's not easy to take out an hour and a half from your schedule, so thank you so much for doing that and for being here. I am now going to hand over to Reva to do a quick introduction of the EU-REI work, as well as set the context for today. Reva, give me just 1 second to bring up the slide. A quick request to non-panelists to please turn off your videos. Reva, can you see the screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right, over to you, Reva.
Thank you, Pavitra. Good afternoon, all of you. I am Reva. I am a technical advisor with GIZ, working on the EU's Resource Efficiency Initiative. EU-REI is a 3-4-year-old project. We started in January 2017, and we are coming to the phase 1 of the project is coming to an end in this December. And we're also happy to be continuing into a second phase after December for another 3 years. In the last 3 years, what we have focused largely on is to understand what are the current and future use of resources in key sectors, being buildings and construction, mobility, focusing on e-mobility in particular, also looking at the kind of resource use that we are going to have in the renewable energy sector, mostly focusing on photovoltaics, and also looking at the end of life of materials, and in particular looking at extended producer responsibility in e-waste and plastics. So that is one part of our work. The second area that we really focus on is looking at how we can build and facilitate partnerships between EU and Indian stakeholders on resource efficiency and circular economy. And this webinar, and as well as a lot of other initiatives and activities that we have undertaken in the past, has also focused on building that kind of partnership and networking across the two geographies. Thirdly, that what we also focus on is creating a broad-based discourse on circular economy and building a sort of common understanding and knowledge on what resource efficiency, circular economy means for different set of stakeholders, and also trying to build up capacities on those areas. Our work, like as you can notice on the slide, is focused on SDG 12, and we also aim to support India in the implementation of responsible consumption and production agenda. And a lot of our work in the past, in last 3 years, has also led to some good impacts and mainstreaming of the resource efficiency and circular economy agenda at the level of national policy, and also increasingly at state and city levels. Many of you may know already, but I would like to highlight it again, that we have a draft national resource efficiency policy that was released last year in July 2019. And we're hoping that in future it will be finalized and will become a facilitative policy for the work on resource efficiency, and will take India onto the next step towards circular economy. We've also had a national resource efficiency strategy that was EU delegation to India, and it has also led to release of sectoral assessment strategies and mainstreaming of agenda across 9 ministries in the Indian government. It also further led to formulation of 2 state strategies, Goa being one of the first states that launched the strategy this February, and Telangana is in the process of formulating its own resource efficiency strategy. And like I said, we have also focused on creating this discourse across different stakeholders at all levels in the country, and we have been able to outreach to I would think a critical mass of people, given the interest and given the mainstreaming of the agenda in across different stakeholders. Now coming to digitalization, I think digital technologies and digitalization, as we see in the project, are an important tool and instrument to moving towards circular economy. However, we are still beginning to really scratch the surface and understand how and what of digital technologies will lead to pushing the agenda of circular economy, and what are the kind of opportunities and barriers that we will encounter while we use this tool to further the work on achieving circular loops and circular systems. I mean, a circular economy transformation is an ambitious transformation, and it requires a lot of thinking, it requires a lot of innovation, and our panel we have in the panel today a lot of experts who will go deep into these issues, so I will not touch upon them. However, I would like to also point out what we have done in the past by using digital technologies. I mean, in the last few months, we all know that we have all been, all have had to sort of adapt to using digital technology for even our day-to-day work. And but in the past, what we have also done is used digital platforms for facilitation and collaboration between EU and Indian businesses, wherein they can identify their different needs and interests and come together and talk to each other and see what works for them. This is something that we did in 2018 during the Circular Economy Mission of EU in India. And what we're also currently doing, something that we're currently doing is that we've developed a waste exchange platform. It's actually developed by CII-GBC, and we have the buyers and suppliers of different kind of waste or secondary raw materials, as we'd like to call it, come together on a common platform and talk to each other, and also try to understand how and what kind of business models for different waste streams and for different resource streams can unfold with use of this online waste exchange platform. And so this is something that we have done in the past, and we continue to try and understand how we can use digital technologies in future. It's going to be an area of interest and focus for us in the second phase. And it is something that has also been outlined in EU-India Joint Declaration on Resource Efficiency and Circular Economy that was signed in July this year. Yeah, so that's all from me on the brief of the project. I will be sharing the link of our project website. And if in case anybody has any questions or need any information, please feel free to contact us. And yeah, over to you, Pavitra. Thank you.
Thank you, Reva. And just on that note, Naren, can I just request you to share like both our email IDs and Reva's email ID on the chat box in case people want to contact us for anything. All right. So if you've just joined us, again, if you want to improve your viewing experience, I suggest going to the top right-hand side corner of the WebEx app and switching to something called the active speaker view, with thumbnails, something like that. That's just so that you don't have to see, just lots of grids with no one on it. All right. I'm going to now ask our panelists for the day to turn on their videos. Ilias, Nina, Stefan, Mesbah, and Anirudha, can I request you to keep your videos on from this point on in the conversation? And thank you so much. All right, so this is where it gets really fun. Putting together this panel itself was such an interesting experience, and sort of the pre-panel discussions that I have with the panelists, like this is number 4 in this series, and we talk about so many interesting things, and maybe just half of that comes out in the conversation. So Naren and I are seriously wondering if we should start doing like the making of the panel discussion series, so that all that information comes out. Maybe it's on YouTube or something. I don't know, just an idea for one of our other series. But I will try my best to play the role of host and try to bring out as much of that conversation here today. On our panel, we have Ilias Iakovidis, who's advisor to the EU Commission DG Connect. He will be sharing with us some of the great work and the perspectives from the EU Commission. We have Nina Shariati, sustainability strategist at the H&M Group, who will be bringing to us the perspective of a large brand, trying to adopt digital solutions towards circularity, towards meeting circularity objectives. We have Stefan Sipka, policy analyst at the European Policy Center, who will be sharing some very interesting work that's being done under the task force on developing a digital roadmap for the circular economy in the EU. We also have Mesbah and Anirudha, our entrepreneurial representatives, because digital tech solution seems to be very much entrepreneurial focused now. We have Mesbah from the EU and Anirudha, who's doing great work here in India. Welcome to everyone. All right. And okay. I think what we encourage you to ask questions in the chat box. I've already seen a few come up, but I think what's also interesting is a lot of the panelists had questions about each other's work when I spoke to them individually. So we might, in fact, see some questions just being passed on between the panelists, and I kind of sit back and just listen in. All right, so we're ready to begin. And I'm going to do some very quick context setting because I don't think I have the prowess and the knowledge of digital tech the way some of our panelists do. But I think what's really important to bring to everyone's attention as we kickstart this conversation is around 4 or 5 years ago, the conversation was very much on, there is this massive transformation to the circular economy. It went from how should we do it? And I think one of the threads that kept reappearing was there's massive amounts of information that needs to be collected, processed, and communicated. There's massive amounts of collaboration that needs to happen across the value chain and so many different stakeholders. And it's a mammoth task, and we need digital technology and solutions to make that happen. And I think it's probably really important to draw down that if we were talking about this massive circular transformation maybe even a decade ago, we might not have made as much progress as we are now because we weren't seeing as many digital tech solutions, and they themselves were not at the level of maturity that they are today. So I think it's very interesting for us to be in this position to say, here's a circular transformation that's beginning to happen. What role does digital technology play in accelerating that? That's going to be the bulk of our conversation. And before we ask our panelists questions, what we'd like to do is quickly get a read of the room. Naren, can you flash up a poll question? This is for our audience, just to understand how well you understand the circular economy and the digital tech interplay.
Yeah, just 1 second.
So Naren will just flash up a poll question and let us know what you think. And that would also give our panelists a good read of the room and where we aim a lot of our conversation. This is a fairly basic question. Just how well do you understand the potential of digital tech in enabling the circular transition? And just to call out that when we're talking about digital tech, There's obviously a lot of software that goes into reporting and stuff, but I think we're looking more at technologies like IoT, advanced digital platforms, AI, and blockchain, and what roles they play. I know the time limit says 5 minutes, but you really only have a minute, and I don't think you need more than that. All right, Naren, if we can, okay, thanks for ending that poll, and we'll just wait up for a second to see what those results look like. When we come up with the poll questions, we try to guess the answers, and we're always wrong, which is quite a pleasant surprise for us. All right, so we've got, I think, the bulk of our audience saying that they have some level of understanding, and I think a very small part of the audience that says no understanding at all. So we'll try to keep that in mind while we have this conversation, but this is where your sort of questions in the chat box can really help us navigate some parts of the conversation. All right, so on to our panelists now. Stefan, I'm going to actually begin with you. You've done a very extensive paper and also a book, talking about digital technologies in the circular economy. Do you want to give us a very quick overview of exactly what digital solutions are in play and how they can enable and accelerate this transition towards circularity? Do you also want to share with us a couple of the fascinating case studies that you have covered in your work?
Sure. Thank you, Pavitra, and thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to join this very exciting discussion. My name is Stefan Sipka. I'm a policy analyst at the European Policy Center. It's an independent policy think tank based in Brussels, and we mainly work on EU-related policies, including circular economy. And in the last couple of years, we have been looking into these linkages between the green transition and the digital transformation, but more specifically as part of the project, the Digital Roadmap for a Circular Economy, we have been looking into how digitalization can serve as an enabler for a circular economy. And this was a 3-year project and comprising a number of workshops and extensive research, looking into different examples, case studies, policies, in order to actually to try to shed more light on this topic. Because as you mentioned before, there is indeed this kind of a digital transition taking place, but there is also, we are facing enormous challenges when it comes to sustainability, also resource use, but other challenges like global warming, resource depletion, pollution, and so forth. So we have these two processes going on, and what we observed is that these two different agendas.
Can I quickly ask anyone in the audience, if your mics are not muted, can you just mute that? Because I think I'm hearing someone else talking about something else, which isn't part of our conversation at all. Thank you very much. Sorry for interrupting, Stefan. Please go ahead.
No worries. So indeed, we basically observed that there are these two agendas, green and digital, and they don't necessarily talk to each other. They're not connected, or they could be, and there are enormous synergies to be exploited if we try to approach them in an integrated way. So basically, what digital can do for circular economy? Circular economy is basically about trying to retain the materials in our economy, but also trying to use them in a smart way. So to reduce their consumption if possible, but also to keep them in our economy. So to use our products as long as possible, to design them to be more circular, so that not to use a lot of hazardous chemicals, or that they are recyclable, also to support recycling, but also repair, remanufacturing, refurbishment, using services, procuring services instead of products, There are a number of these angles, and what is important is that you look at different stages of the product life cycle. So from design to end of life phase, to waste, right? And there are different value chains. We are living in a globalized economy, and everything is connected. And in order to have this kind of a truly circular economy, sustainable economy, we need to have them, these systems, these different stakeholders need to be interconnected. So that's one thing. Digitalization can support connectivity, data sharing, information sharing, stakeholder partnerships. Simply data can be transferred and can flow much more efficiently, and information can be shared and also gathered with the use of digital tools. Second important thing is that digital tools can actually make our industrial processes more efficient, waste management, different kinds of mobility can become more efficient if you use, if we actually develop and deploy digital solutions. So for example, artificial intelligence, it can be used to speed up research and development. So you can, for example, develop more circular metal alloys faster than otherwise that can support eco-design and making our products more circular. You can use AI also in waste processing. So you can use image recognition to sort out waste more efficiently. And also you can use robotics for that purpose. And there are examples like Zen Robotics, or also AI used by a Belgian waste operator, Recykal, that are using AI for image recognition, waste sorting, and that can be coupled also with robotics, with also bigger companies like Apple. Apple is doing like using robotics to sort out waste or even dismantle certain used equipment. You can use apps, for example, now to for mobility. So you can actually buy service and use different mobility options with the help of online apps. Also, online platforms are very relevant. Blockchain, I'm sure that this will be discussed later on, and Mesbah will cover this topic more extensively. But blockchain can be very useful technology to enable transparent and safe sharing of information across different value chains. I mean, the thing is that the sky's the limit to this discussion, because there are lots of examples that we managed to discover, and they are all available in our book that is publicly available at the EPC website. But just in a nutshell, you can improve our economy and society, our processes, and enable better sharing of information and connectivity with the use of digital tools. Policies can help, but of course there are caveats to these possibilities, and something that we can also discuss further, what are the challenges and barriers.
Thank you, Steph. I know that wasn't a fair question, but we needed someone to do the overview of digital tech across all parts of the value chain for CE. So thank you for doing that, and we will get more into those details in just a little bit. Ilias, if I may come over to you now, the EU has released a digital strategy, I think earlier this year. There's been a circular economy action plan in play for quite a while. And I think what we'd like to understand is, the Commission is really taking this really integrated and strategic approach to talking about digital technologies for enabling the circular economy. So why is that approach, and what exactly is happening there? Ilias, I think you're muted.
Good afternoon for you. Good morning for some of us. Thank you for being here. I wanted to make sure that we are as interactive as possible. I already posed a question to our audience, so don't be shy to ask questions about what I'm going to say, or ask for references, or even pose questions back and interact. So this is really something that is important to me, because a reason for me to participate is to learn something also from you. So it goes both ways. But let me ask with a question that I already posed, and that is, do you think that digital is actually helping the SDG 12? We have not determined what the impact is, or is it actually making it worse? It has a negative impact on SDG 12. I will answer that at the end, maybe at the end of my first question or later on, but think about that. Let me start with another question. Do you think that we actually can solve our biggest problem at the moment, the climate change, by stopping burning fossil fuels? Is it really about renewable energy only or not? Just think about it. So suppose tomorrow all our energy is renewable. Are we done? First of all, we can't do that. I mean, it'll take decades until we get rid of fossil fuels. But no, what I want to say is that we need to do more than that. And we actually need to restore our nature, restore our biodiversity, and learn what nature has been always doing. And that is to be circular, not to waste anything. So circularity is a not new concept. And I'm sure you have entertained that already in your previous seminars. Circularity is something that nature is doing since its existence. So let me say it again. And let me reverse, because repetition is a matter of knowledge. Circular economy is the silver bullet to tackling climate change. It's a silver bullet to our health. Health with capital H, the planetary health, the one health, animal, human, plant, atmosphere, our oceans. It's really the silver bullet. And I don't think that people understand that. So sorry if I am repetitive based on some other discussions you had, but circular economy, if I had to choose, is maybe the way to go, and it's not trivial challenge. We need to go smart way about it, because circular economy is behind, it's the driver. Our economy is a driver behind the emissions. The economy is the driver behind the natural waste, the natural resource depletion, biodiversity. So to tackle that driver, we have to go smart ways. Smart ways is to actually make sure that we understand what we're doing. We understand better where the material goes, where does it come from, where does it end up, how can I keep the material longer in use so I avoid waste. So this is the smart way, and digital is it's a necessary condition. Of course, it's not sufficient, but digital technologies and the data processing, acquisition, and management is the necessary condition for getting the circular economy going. Now, why Europe? We are committing ourselves to be climate neutral by 2050. To do that, of course, we will not miss our silver bullet to work on circular economy. And to do that, if you really want to do something about circular economy, you need to change not only people's behavior. I think that a lot of people think that, oh, it's about consumerism, and if we just change the behavior of consumers, we'll be fine. It's about systemic changes. Somewhere I have heard the estimate that consumer behavior is like less than 50%. Some say even less than 20% of the emission is due to behavior of consumer, because consumers don't have a choice if the product they order on Amazon comes by train or by truck. I mean, those are things that it's not really their choice. So the systemic changes have been already mentioned, and this is producers' responsibility. It's better design, reparability, of course, reuse, keeping the materials, and recycling, and we'll talk more about that. And to do that, we first need to do this cartography of where these materials, primary raw resources go. And if we can do more with less materials, and that means also with less energy and less fossil fuels, if we can share, if we can keep things longer in value, I mean, in the economy, this is what digital is all about. So Europe, of course, doesn't want to miss that.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And I think what is important is that you said circular economy is that silver bullet to sort of reach some of these other targets, and because that in itself actually has come up as a debate, and I'm sure several people in this audience have also debated with me and others on in different forums on this. Is circular economy really that silver bullet? So it was good to hear your perspective on that. I'm going to go over now to Nina. Nina, from H&M's perspective, how is digitalization helping you meet your sort of circular objectives? And what is some? Can you give us a couple of quick examples on what exactly you're doing in this area of digital for circular?
Yeah. because we had some technical issues, gonna check in to see. Do you see me and can you hear me?
Yes, all good now.
Okay, great. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining, and thank you Stefan and Ilias for the insights that you shared. I would like to start by adding on a bit to just paint up the picture, because the answers we got from the audience as well related to where circular economy is and what it's about. So, and before we start talking about circular economy, I think there needs to be a notion of how the system looks like today, how we have been doing business and produced and used products since the Industrial Revolution, kind of, which is basically it's based on a linear model, and what that means is that as a designer, you have an idea, you start by designing the idea, then you start sourcing for the product, you use the materials, you create the product, you produce it in the amount that you need, and then you sell it to the customers. And the customers, depending on how long they use it or how long it's usable or they like it or whatever amount of time, whenever they're done with it, what happens is that that product is being discarded. And this doesn't necessarily mean that the product that is being discarded is not usable. It's just like the mindset that we have had, which is like use resources, use a lot of energy to produce products, use it for a short period of time, and then discard it. And what is happening is this is impacting our climate. It is creating large amounts of waste in landfills, increasing greenhouse impacts, etc. So that's the current model. And what a solution to that, and in a rise of creating knowledge about our state of planet and the climate crisis, which is to shift to a circular model. And circular economy is based on three main principles, which is to design out waste and pollution out of the system, to prolongate the usage of products as long as possible, and to regenerate a natural system. And what would that kind of mean from a fashion perspective? What that means is that at the design stage of a product, you design a product in a way that it is easily, by the time you're done with it, when it's no longer usable, you can bring it back as a resource in the system to actually use that material to create new products. And before it ends up there, you also create systems for instance, reparation that was mentioned. So if your garment is being like, if you get a hole in your sock, you don't throw it away, you start by repair it, right? And there, if you no longer want it, maybe you can sell it to someone else that wants it, or rent it, or share that product in a way. So that's basically in a high level what the model is and what the circular economy is about. And looking,
I'm going to quickly get into where H&M is using digitalization to address a couple of these areas. That would be great to hear from you.
Yeah, absolutely. Get into it. And so basically, looking into that, digitalization comes in as a necessary point in all these areas. And an important part in that is data sharing. That was also mentioned, in transparently sharing data. And to give an example to that is we have been having initiative in place called garment collecting, which is basically when whatever textiles that you have, you can bring it back to H&M and get some kind of vouchers or some kind of how do you say, incentive back. And what H&M is doing that is in collaboration with a partner, ICO, those garments are being looped back in the system in terms of being recycled, downcycled to maybe car fillings, and maybe resold to other markets. And one of the challenges in this is that coming back to designing in a way and bringing back that garment so that you can use that resources, is that currently it's around 1% that is being upcycled to new garments, and this is highly due to lack of innovation, but also lack of insights. So for instance, with ICO's gathering, or these garment collectors are gathering the garments, it's extremely difficult for them to actually know what has been going into that garment in terms of producing it, in terms of material, chemicals, where it was produced, etc. And for that becomes an extremely important enabler in kind of connecting the dots and enabling circularity to firstly have standardized data that is harmonized within the industry, and then for it to be easily shared with the partners. And there we are collaborating with an organization, one of many. We are also collaborating with research institutes. Swedish Research Institute of Sweden is one of those. But we are collaborating with UNECE, who is looking into firstly develop a standardized suggestion to how the data structure should look like, both from prolongation of the product lifetime and also to be able to reduce that waste. But what with UNECE is also looking at what kind of technology is necessary to actually enable that. So that is one example where we are collaborating and looking into how that could be possible.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that, Nina. And I think the three panelists so far have set this big picture overview and context. And I'm going to go over to our entrepreneurs on the panel here. Sorry, quick request to anyone who's not speaking to mute yourselves so that we get as little disturbance as possible. Sorry, I was saying we'll just go over to our entrepreneurs to, say, how are you guys tackling some of these issues? So Mesbah, maybe we can begin with you first. Actually, a funny story about how I found Circularise. I think it was almost 3 years ago when I was writing an article, I think that's still up on LinkedIn somewhere, and I started using the term Circularise material flows. And we had a couple of our early team here at Infinitive at that point, and I said, guys, before we put this up publicly, we should probably check if the word circularize is actually used in the context of the circular economy. So we did a Google search, and at that point, actually, the only sort of result that came up for connecting the word circularize in the context of the circular economy was Mesbah's company, Circularise. So I think it's quite strange, but also nice, Mesbah, to have you here today. And you've grown in leaps and bounds since then. So it'll be really great to hear your story. You didn't even have to wait like Google did for 20 years, for your company name to become a verb. So yeah, I think over to you now to just quickly tell us what exactly is the problem you're trying to solve, and why are you using digital tech and specifically blockchain to solve that?
Sure, of course. Thank you for having me again. Thanks for the other panelists for being here. I'm really looking forward to continuing this discussion. I'm already having a lot of things in my mind that I want to ask some of you. So the way the company Circularise started, and to come back to that verb thing, you can either create the company name and then hopefully that becomes a verb, or you can start with a verb and then it's already there. And also the name, I mean, it is really a testament to the way the company started, right? It's really meant to circularize the economy. 4 years ago, I was doing my master's thesis here in Delft in the Netherlands, and I was specifically researching circular economy and how me as a designer can attribute to that. I'm an industrial product designer by education, and I have a strong love for entrepreneurship. For over 10 years now, I've had many different companies, and when I was graduating about 4 years ago, I wanted to do something with these two things, right? So I wanted to really understand circular economy and see how I can help in a systemic manner, not in a very small, not that that's not good, but I really wanted to zoom out and see how can we really change the industry. And if that means that we have to like work for 20, 30 years in order to achieve it, that's fine, right? So really had a look into certain really important topics that are still the core of why we exist. So namely critical materials, rare earth elements, circular economy in general sense is recycling something we really don't want, or is it a necessity, right? In terms of all the loops, what happens? Like, oftentimes we talk about recycling being, the last resort, but at the same time, it's also the only thing that really truly closes the loop, whereas the others are prolonging the inevitable. So we really wanted to have a look, and one of the things that I did among many other studies was look at recycling of one of the most complex waste streams out there, which is electronic waste. So I went to e-waste facilities where end-of-life products like flat screen monitors and fridges were collected, and just had a look, and really it's not any different than what you're talking about, Nina, in H&M's garment perspective, that they have no idea what is being collected. They don't know what kind of materials are in there. They don't know about the additives, about the chemicals. And oftentimes, even in Europe and in the Netherlands, where electronic recycling is one of the top-notch facilities in the world, they're using hammers and screwdrivers to open up some products and to see, does it contain maybe a hazardous material? So what kind of an additive does this plastic or maybe have, right? And oftentimes it's just guesswork. So the best guys out there who worked 10 years in those facilities, they had the best knowledge about what could happen or what could be inside a product, but it was all based on guesswork. So for me, that was like an eye-opener, saying like, what could happen if we enable these products to have their material composition at the very least be attached to it permanently, right? Just as if you buy food, there is a list of ingredients. Why is that not available on any other product out there? Why doesn't your laptop has a a QR code with a list of ingredients out there? Why doesn't that exist? And first, before we really wanted to tackle the problem in terms of a solution, we wanted to see what could be a potential benefit. So we did a pilot in Italy about 3 years ago now, and we saw that if you just simulate taking end-of-life products, putting a QR code on them with very trivial data in terms of material composition, chemicals, etc., these workers were improving their efficiency of sorting by 3 times within 24 hours. And the increased waste collection and waste sorting, we wouldn't even be able to measure that, because they could make sorting decisions that are today impossible. They could make decisions that are today just not out there because they don't have the data. So we really understood that there is a potential impact here that we can bring by bringing transparency, and then obviously you're going to look into solutions like how can we solve that. And one of the things that you immediately stumble upon is, if we're going to have a digital infrastructure to share all of this data, what's going to happen with all that sensitive data that might be out there, the tiers of suppliers that might not be feasible. Like nobody is really keen in sharing all of their customers, all of their suppliers, all of their transactional data, just the chemical composition itself. So you stumble upon trust, you stumble upon privacy and confidentiality, and basically that's where blockchain, among other technologies, comes into play.
Excellent. And I'm going to ask you some follow-up questions on that technology itself, because there's a lot of blockchain solutions out in the market today. Yours has an additional layer to it, but I'll come back to that in just a second, because we haven't had a chance to hear from Anirudha yet, and he's been nodding away at a lot of what you were saying, Mesbah. Anirudha, you work in a slightly different part of the value chain, and well, you're sort of our only Indian representative on the panel. So, it's going to fall on you to sort of tell us, just maybe start by telling us a little bit about what you actually do. You're different from, I think, some of the other players in the market because you've got this entire ecosystem of digital products. So do you want to take us through what it is, what some of those products are, and what you are trying to achieve as a very, very ambitious startup, may I add?
Thank you. So maybe, on the backdrop, you can put up the ecosystem slide that might just, help set the context as well. But I would like to keep it more interactive.
Sure. Just one second. I think this will be a good time to just quickly flash up that slide and leave it on for maybe a minute or so. And then, Anirudha will just talk.
Sure. And I'll set the context. So, a lot of us at Recykal, got into the space without any previous experience, working in the waste management environment in India or elsewhere. I was a banker, doing investment banking in New York, and then running another startup before this. But what really fascinated us, especially in India, with the massive rise in consumption of data, consumption of smartphones, the digitization of the proliferation of digital solutions, was that at one level we had the waste streams in India extremely disintegrated. You had consumers, bulk waste generators, who were generating waste. You had recyclers on the other hand, who were ambitiously setting up more and more recycling capacity. And yet there was no meaningful way for these stakeholders to interact. It was pretty offline, pretty disconnected, pretty broken. And therefore, we thought that, after e-commerce, m-commerce, is it time now for W commerce, for waste commerce? And I think that's really where we sort of got into the ecosystem. We're still very focused on the digital side of things. We've not yet explored, or we don't even know much about blockchain so far. But what we've tried to do is basically, really connect the stakeholders at this point, get them onto a platform with the hope of making it interactive for the stakeholders and coming up with insights going forward. So if I were to summarize what we do is we've really, our business rests on a marketplace, on a digital marketplace that really works at two levels. So if you see the left hand side of this rather complex looking chart, what we try and do is we connect consumers to households and businesses, so bulk waste generators, with the local processors of waste. So in India, for instance, we have the municipalities that run waste processing centers. Now, these centers actually run by NGOs or by entrepreneurs or by waste management companies. But really, what we tried to do was is to sort of create an Airbnb kind of a model for these waste processing centers, call them recycle points, give them a digital platform so that they can connect with the, with schools, with the Microsoft campuses, with consumers, and enable a professional experience through a digital solution. So, consumers and so the Infosys campus in India, for instance, asked us, what happens to our plastics when you collect them? What happens to our e-waste when you collect them? Is it going to go into an informal recycler, or is it going to end up in the Ganga River? And I think that's what that's the transparency and traceability that the platform enables. So our platforms would enable the Infosys campus to schedule a pickup. They would see pricing visibility of what the local processor would pay him, et cetera, et cetera. It would be digital payments, tax-enabled, GST-enabled invoicing, a hassle-free experience. But I think what eventually creates or closes the loop is basically allowing for these aggregated sellers or these collection points. So collection points are predominantly for plastics, paper, and other dry waste, but you also have e-waste. And for aggregators in India to sell to an authorized network of buyers, so to recyclers, etc. And that's where we are currently channelizing about 8,000 tons of plastics month on month from aggregators pan India, including so not only the large metro cities of the country, but sensitive geographies like Dehradun, Goa, Andaman Nicobar Islands, the Arunachal Pradesh, etc., and getting them into recycling channels. And all of this, sorry. Okay, so all of this really, trying to build the layers of transparency and traceability, which eventually also ties in with our attempt to help brand owners with traceable EPR fulfillment.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. That looks like quite, I think, an ecosystem, like an entire suite of services that you're looking to, intervene digitally in the waste management space. I'm going to stay with you for just a second, Anirudha, because I think one of the other really interesting products that you have is the one on DRS, right? Do you want to talk us through a little bit about what the DRS digital intervention there is, and also who are some of the stakeholders you're engaging in deploying the solution?
Absolutely.
And you might actually want to start by telling us what DRS is, and then.
Well, I think this audience, at least my panelists, would understand DRS much better than most others. So I think DRS has worked so well in the West, whether it's Europe, whether it's parts of the US, the UK, coming into Singapore, etc. So, the EPR law in India has been evolving pretty quickly. And the latest framework, the guidelines by the government, talk about QR codes multiple times, and they talk about DRS, which really opens up a true opportunity for traceable waste channelization. And how we attempt DRS, which is probably a little different from how it would be done in the West, is we don't rely completely on vending machines or the RVM mechanism. So DRS is basically the deposit return or refund scheme, where consumers get back the deposit that they paid for when they purchased plastic packaging, for instance, back from retail. And the model that we approach is very simple, smartphone driven, QR code enabled solution, which integrates with one of the ubiquitous apps that we use, whether it's Google Pay, whether it's Paytm, whether it's one of those. It could be a government application as well, and sort of gets that critical mass quickly. There are two broad platforms that we're trying to work with. One is where DRS would be legislation driven. So you work with the state government and then a mandate DRS. It's basically regulate. And the second is when you can work as a consortium of brands. So brands such as maybe Pepsi, Coke, etc., P&G could come on together and basically implement it. Yeah, so it's still early days for DRS in India, though.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. I think I'm going to circle back to Ilias now. There's some great work happening at the Commission, Ilias, on product passports and tracking and tracing. Do you want to take us very quickly through, as the EU Commission, what is the work that's being done? And clearly you're also working with a lot of the stakeholders in the ecosystem. You just want to share a little bit more about that? You're muted, Ilias. I think you'll have to unmute yourself.
About that. Sorry. As you know, in March, we have adopted as a Commission the new Circular Economy Action Plan, and some of these ideas are there. And basically the last two interventions, so they show very good examples of what needs to be done, but it needs to be scaled and it needs to be all linked up. So the recycling and the manufacturing and the design, all that has to stay somehow connected. So the Circular Economy Action Plan has one of the initiatives there is Sustainable Product Initiative. Within the Sustainable Product Initiative, we are trying to establish something called Product Passport. It's not a new idea. I'm sure there are people that are doing it in some parts of the value chain, but what we really want to do is to take it from the beginning, from the mines, the material extraction, value chains, sub-product components, manufacturing of a product, all the way to post, retailers, repairers, and recyclers. And this is really challenging, and it's less about technology, because at some point you ask the audience, how much you know about technology? It's really about the governance, about the trust, about standards, because one thing that I'm trying to get and working with GS1 on, what is the universal standard on identifying things and localizing things and tracking things, And you see that quickly you get into territories of silos of different sectors, economy sectors that have their own semantics and their own identifiers, and they're familiar with this and that. So what we're trying to do as a Commission, we're trying to do the governance issue, so kind of like sandwich the problem. So we will actually next week, you will see from us something called Data Governance Act that will support what we call the data spaces. And one of the most important data space in this discussion is the circular economy data space that I'm personally working on. that is the other side of the coin called product passport. If you really want to have a product passport, you need to establish a space where manufacturers, the economic actors, see a reason why would they share data they didn't share before. Why would they open it up? Because they have a business incentives to share it with other economic actors because they get value back. And so just to come back to the recycling, if I as a producer know that my product XY model hits the recycling phase much sooner than I expected, I will have the information to understand what is wrong with that product so I can redesign it. Okay, so that's one ICT already in place and sharing of data in place. If a repairer cafes and a lot of businesses that are there to repair things have online access to dismantling manual or where to find original products or good spare parts, if that is online for repair cafe, that enables them to actually do their job. So product passport at the moment, the major objective is to do circular economy, but more and more people start discovering that this is a great vehicle also for social issues and child labor, to monitor the ethical and social issues regarding the mining of the materials. It is great thing for regulatory compliance with respect to safety. So I have so much interest now from all corners that they putting so much weight on this product passport already and requirements. I have the danger of choking it before it's born. So what I'm trying to say is that, yes, we understand that data, tracking, tracing technologies, blockchain, and the smart questioning is that's what I want to come back to the previous speakers. How do we enable trusted environment where people can see only what they really need to see and enable business to business and then later on business to consumer, business to government views and information flows? This is what we're doing at a scale. I mean, we're talking about at the moment, six different economic sectors. Batteries, this will go already. You will see a regulatory act next month where we will introduce product passport for batteries. Plastics, textiles, and that's for Nina. This is on our radar to do a product passport for textiles. Construction material, and we just introduced something called building logbook and how we're going to take care of the material around the construction and the buildings, and electronics. And that's where I personally work on. How do we actually track, trace, and make sure that the electronics are more, the material is really valuable, rare earth, 10% of our gold, and the electronics. The problem with electronics is that the emissions of producing them are more than using them. So we really need to make sure that we get the circularity and electronics sector going.
Right. Thank you so much, Ilias, for sharing that. And I think we naturally have to go over to Mesbah now. I think Mesbah, this came up, I think, in my conversation with Ilias yesterday as well. Maybe this is the right opportunity to talk about your smart questioning technology a little bit more, right? Because for a lot of us who sort of understand sustainability and circular economy, but don't understand digital tech, we've been given this impression that, you know, blockchain is so great and it is the solution for traceability and transparency, but that comes with its own issues, right? Which is who can see my data? And I've in fact spoken to startups that have said, when some of the supplier information is transferred up to a brand, it opens you up to so many other questions as well, which suppliers don't really want to face, and which is, again, one of the limitations to deploying blockchain for the traceability and transparency part. And you have a solution to that, right? So do you want to talk us through the smart questioning technology first?
Of course, yeah. So I think there's a common misconception which is slowly fading away, but it really started with a lot of people thinking blockchain can kind of magically solve all of these issues, which is obviously not the case, as well as the fact that just because something is on a blockchain doesn't make that, you know, privacy protecting. It in fact is the exact opposite. So if you put some data on a blockchain, it's now public data. So if you want to protect somebody's privacy, the last thing you want to do is go on a blockchain. If you really want to be like a criminal, so to say, the last thing you want to use is a public blockchain to do your stuff, right? So it really, instead of blockchain being the solution, basically blockchain creates it solves one thing, but it really brings another huge problem. It solves the trust part in the data, but it brings a huge risk to privacy and confidentiality, right? And that's exactly where we have added some layers of cryptography on top of the technology called zero knowledge proofs that enable you to have best of both worlds, protect the trust of the data, but never share or risk any sensitive data. And that's in essence what we achieve with our patent pending technology called smart questioning, that allows somebody to make a statement on, let's say, your chemical composition of your product. So if you're talking about a product passport for plastics or for chemicals or for electronics or for whatever, nobody in that supply chain is going to share their exact composition of data, their suppliers that they're using, and the actual amounts. Oftentimes, this is very proprietary data. So how do you put that on a blockchain? Even if you would encrypt it with your, the normal AES encryption, that's not going to work. Because, if I'm going to encrypt my password and somebody can crack it, I'll just update my password. But if you're going to encrypt your recipe and somebody's cracking it, they've cracked it. There's no way to change it, right? So normal encryption, that is usually computationally hidden. So if somebody has enough computational power, they can just decrypt it. If it's on a blockchain, I've got all the time in the world to decrypt that data, right? So that really doesn't work. And you need to find out a way that you can perfectly, what we call encryption, perfectly hide the data with zero risk of anybody ever decrypting it, right? So and that's what we have done with smart questioning, where in essence you can ask a question, let's say, does this product contain chemical X or additive C in certain ratio? And the original data holder can make a statement, say, no, it does not contain this. Here is the reference, the commitment that I did on a blockchain that this is the case. Here is maybe an auditor that proved that this statement that I'm making is based on actual data that is verified by a third party. But you will never see anything more than that statement in terms of the data that's behind it. So we think blockchain can be enabler, at the same time it's creating this huge risk of privacy. And in many cases in supply chains, without solving the privacy issue, you're never going to get anything in terms of privacy out of them, because it's just too much of a risk for any company or any supplier to start putting that data on any kind of system. And then the last thing that I want to add to this is you have public blockchains, which is where we think the future is, especially if you're talking about data silos and standardization. You really need to go for a public permissionless blockchain that can be used by anybody, by any industry. So the solution that we have seen oftentimes with competitors is that they're going for a very closed source blockchain that is permissioned, nobody can see it. Sure, that will protect the privacy up to an extent, but it will never create that standardized future of data sharing if it's just a closed system. So you need the open blockchain and you need the privacy aspect.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that, Mesbah. I believe Ilias may have follow-up questions for you, but I wonder if we can sort of stay on a little bit after 4:30 to continue this part, the tech part of the discussion. But also for those in the audience who may not be here beyond 4:30 and are techies, you might want to look at this very fascinating white paper that's on Circularize's website. It was fascinating and I understood none of it, so I'm going to hold Mesbah down to taking me through some of that later, hopefully. But if you understand it, good for you, and I think you will find it pretty exciting to learn more about the technology solution itself. I'm actually going to have to go over to Stefan now. We haven't heard from you in a little bit, Stefan. You've obviously, sort of studied the extent of sort of solutions that can come from these digital technologies and where they get applied to enable the circular transition. But what are some of the biggest challenges that might be there?
When it comes to using digital solutions for a circular economy, let's say. Well, let's say, and yeah, I risk being a bit repetitive, but one is definitely huge challenges about sharing data information, as mentioned so far. That is really an important thing, because let's say it boils down to two main challenges. One is that a lack of technical standards or widely accepted technical standards, which then hampers this kind of sharing of data, because there can be different formats, simply different way how this data is actually organized. Another thing is rules on sharing data. So as discussed, there are this kind of privacy-related concerns over personal data or IPR, business-sensitive data, and it's really important to have this information flowing across different value chains, and so that, as discussed, repairers can have information about what is contained in the products or how to repair them, or also recyclers, but also producers can actually get the feedback so they can design their products in a better way. So that is one challenge, and that's something that policymakers can help with. Another thing is actually deploying digital solutions. Then again, think about robotics or AI. This is something that public investments can be helpful, or at least creating some kind of incentives like public procurement, green public procurement, and so forth, because there needs to be some also a business case, a market for the deployment of green and digital solutions, and that may be lacking. For example, in Europe, recyclers are very often small, medium enterprises. So they are not always incentivized. It can be very expensive for them to invest in digital solutions. But also there can be difficulties for repairers to use this tool. So investments, public or also leveraging private investments with the help of also public authorities can help with this. But yes, costs, having a business case, and data related difficulties when it comes to managing data, sharing them, processing them, maybe they would be the barriers. But then there are, of course, a challenge when it comes to digitalization, environmental impacts of digitalization, which is again another topic, which I could reflect on now or afterwards.
Right. I think we'll come back to that in just a second. Nina, I think I'd love to hear from you about, as H&M and as this really large brand, what have been some of your challenges in exploring digital technologies towards circularity?
It's a good question, and it's I just want to connect back to what has been said. Digitalization and technology is one aspect of it. I would greater challenges that whole data, having access to standardized data and to be able to share it in a harmonized way within the industry. But if looking into industry at large, or any kind of company, one of the challenges within driving circular economy historically has been that it's being driven as like a parallel stream, that it is maybe a sustainability team that is looking into it, and it has a lot of sustainability knowledge connected to it. But what is happening, which is great, and it's due to a lot of different reasons, one of which is actually EU Commission's EU's new circularity strategy and Green Deal, is that more and more companies are embedding that strategy within their business strategy. So I would say one of the overarching challenges historically has been to prioritize kind of circularity into business, or actually incorporating it into business. And the second part has been that the technology hasn't been really there. So how do you find solutions that enable this? But one of the biggest challenges right now, I would say, is that whole standardization of data. Because even if we would have the, let's say, a great system within our company, within H&M, that can easily share data, it could be we could add a blockchain layer to it, we would still have a huge dependency on the data that is being put in there, that is trustworthy, that is correct, that is easy to understand, and that, I would say, is one of the biggest challenges right now for the industry at large.
Mute, Pavitra. But maybe I can hook into that very, very shortly, because
Sure.
the work that we do at Circularise, a major part of it is exactly this problem that you're now describing, the lack of a standard, because we understand that supply chains are extremely complex. no matter how big you are, even if you're H&M, you're still one of the players, right? There's still hundreds of others out there that are just as big, maybe even bigger on the supply side, on the brand side. And what we're doing is not only creating this commercial solution, but we're also building an open infrastructure, an open protocol. So if you look at email, for example, today, right? So you might use Gmail, I might use Outlook, and all the kind of different commercial implementations. But for some reason, they all work together. It doesn't matter if I'm using Gmail and I'm sending an email and you're opening up, Outlook, which is actually competitors, right? One is Microsoft, one is Google. They all work together because they're built on an open infrastructure, but open internet protocol. And that is what we're also focusing on together with our partners in the chemical industry to build this open protocol. So then nobody is dependent on Circularise as a commercial entity because supply chains are so big. Everybody will have their own, maybe niche solutions here and there, but we need to ensure they all work together just as email works together. And that's one of the main critical things. And if you just have blockchain, it's not going to work. If you just have zero knowledge cryptography, it's not going to work. If you just have an open protocol, it's not going to work. You really need to get all of these elements together to solve the major problems.
Thank you.
Sorry, just wanted to shortly jump in when it comes to the barriers before we close this. One important thing to bear in mind is the level of digital literacy and skills in our economy and society. And that is an important thing. We shouldn't assume that everybody, can that know how to use internet, first of all, or that they can read the QR code on the product, or that they simply understand how this whole thing works when it comes to data, accessing data, sharing data. And so whether we talk about consumers or citizens or the workforce or the management or policymakers, it's important that they understand the basics, the concepts, and then that they can actually have the know-how, the skills, how to really use the most of this new digital tools and to manage data properly. That's
excellent. Thank you, Stefan. And Mesbah, I'm going to come back to you in just a second, but I think, Anirudha, we'd like to hear from you at this point in terms of, this entire digital suite of services that you've created. What are your challenges? And I think you might be able to, in fact, pick up from some of what Stefan has said, because I saw you nodding away in agreement.
Right. So I think, adoption of technology and adoption of solutions is definitely a very important task if we are to, build onto our platforms going forward. It's much easier when you're explaining the value of technology to a brand owner, say to a Unilever or to an Apple, for instance, and much more challenging and complex when you're explaining that same solution to an aggregator, right? I mean, an aggregator who for the past 5 generations in India is basically aggregating waste. It could have been paper and now plastics, right? And I think that's where the adoption sort of comes in. And I think so. I think there's got to be an underlying business case that will drive the adoption, right? I mean, today, for instance, when we look at the marketplace where we try to connect the informal sector sellers with the authorized recyclers, you've got to create a value proposition with better pricing, visibility of demand, predictability of demand, a quality check that digitization can provide, which otherwise in an offline setting will be less optimal. Also, I think bringing in, I think is also an element of authenticity and traceability. So, for instance, on the marketplace, when we take pictures of the truck or of the material, it's AI enabled to the extent that it becomes very difficult for recyclers or other stakeholders to duplicate it for other EPR needs, right? So I think every solution, you've got to add layers in your own way to make it more traceable and transparent. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Anirudha. And I think something that was actually really fascinating that came up in our conversation earlier was how strong your tech team is and the backend that you're building. And and also the prior expertise of some of your founders in getting, I mean, they've had this experience of getting communities that typically don't adopt digital technologies to actually get onto digital platforms. And I think we will wait to see where Recykal is able to go with this sort of a tech team and that expertise already on board. I think just the composition of your founding team is pretty fascinating for us. I think I saw some questions in the chat box, but I also see our panelists answering some of them. So if you want to just, if you feel like your question's been unanswered, I just want to ask you to paste it again at the moment. We'll get to the questions in just about 5 minutes. Mesbah, just picking back up on what you were saying about creating this open standard. You know, you recently established a lot of collaboration, which brings industry together. I think what's fascinating for me with that sort of work is how you're using digital technologies to bring all the stakeholders in the ecosystem together. Do you want to sort of highlight, tell us a little bit more about that partnership that you recently announced, and what is your main objective with that, and what are the roles that some of the stakeholders are playing?
Sure. So the main objective with this partnership is it's a partnership with a number of large chemical companies here in Europe, namely Domo Chemicals, Covestro, Borealis, and then on the other side some brands like Porsche, right? So the guys who are eventually sourcing materials for that product. In this case, it's an automotive car. We're doing similar work with some Japanese OEMs in the automotive space, and the nice thing is that they both have a short-term need as well as a long-term need for transparency, right? Because I mean, I think from today's talk, the long-term need is quite there. We understand why long-term digital solutions could help, right? So imagine we can snap our fingers and everything is traceable and everything has this digital history to it. It would bring benefit, but why should a company invest in that today, right? Who's going to be the pioneers and for what reason? And that's where we see these companies who are, essentially creating from virgin oil, usually plastic products. They're now investing heavily in going sustainable. That means that they're not going to rely on fossil fuels anymore to dig from the earth, but they're going to look into and tap into recycled sources and renewable sources, right? And the reason they want to start doing this is because there is a better price for that product. There is more demand. And so if you're being a brand or an OEM, you want to source these materials because you have sustainability targets. You want to get a better value for your product because there is more demand from the consumer side, which is ultimately driving this whole thing, right? If consumers will never, prefer a sustainable product over a non-sustainable product, I believe a lot of these will not fly unless there is very strong regulation, right? So as long as we have this strong consumer demand, brands are interested to buy sustainable. As long as brands don't have fully integrated, vertically integrated supply chains, they will have a need for transparency in that supply chain because no brand is willing to risk their brand image to make a statement without having the proof. So getting that proof, that's exactly what we're providing, to provide that this batch of material, polymer, was sourced from a recycled source or from a renewable source. It was connected all the way from the compounders and converters all the way to the final brands, and then the brands can be assured that this is exactly the same material in different ways. So you can do it in different chain of custody models to prove it. But eventually, that's the short-term reason. If a brand wants to source this, we always say there is no point in manufacturing sustainably if you can't prove it.
Right. Thanks for that, Mesbah. And since you brought up the regulation part, I think I'll bring Stefan and Ilias back into the conversation. Where do you see the role of governance in this? Ilias already touched on a couple of points, but Stefan, I'm not sure if you want to add on to that, because you had some recommendations for policy making based on your sort of study. Do you want to take us through some of those recommendations, and then we'll go over to Ilias as well to understand a bit more about how the Commission is looking at this?
Sure. So basically, when it comes to digitalization as an enabler for circular economy, it's important to have this kind of policy support for better data management. So establishing this kind of supporting the industry, also being active in establishing these different rules and standards for that better collection of data, sharing, processing, and so forth. And the upcoming circular economy data space is definitely something that will be very helpful, and also digital product passports. That's one thing. Then second is that definitely it's important to invest in development and deployment of new digital solutions for better data management, but also simply to improve our industrial processes, waste management processes, and so forth. So that's very much about investments, also supporting this digital education as mentioned. Also, it's important to use digital tools to improve policies themselves. So for better market surveillance, for example, also to digitalize public procurement, that can also be useful for the greening of our economy. But lastly, greening ICT. So that's something that I just wanted now to just in short, digitalization can also lead to emissions and also material consumption, including critical materials, and also e-waste, which is the fastest growing waste stream. So we need to be proactive. The digitalization is not neutral on this. It can also lead to environmental impacts, and we need to make the digital transformation itself green, again, through eco-design of electronics, thinking also of maybe how to make our software more sustainable, thinking about sustainable artificial intelligence that can make sustainable decisions. So there can be a number of also making our infrastructure more energy efficient, like data centers reliant on renewable energy, making blockchain or cloud more energy efficient. I mean, that's something that's also very much about regulation and standards, but also creating economic incentives for the development deployment of such solutions. I mean, that's really like, in a nutshell, what our recommendations would consist of.
Right, and thank you so much for bringing that up. And I think it was a question from the audience and a question I had for you as well. I think when Bitcoin was becoming very popular, I remember the conversation, I mean, Bitcoin, which was based on blockchain. I think the conversation was, oh, to mine one Bitcoin, you could have instead powered an entire village, or, you know, like a small town or something like that. So I think the focus on sort of the impact of digitalization itself is pretty important. Ilias, I'm not sure if you want to add on to that in terms of both the challenges as well as how you enable it, like what you see the role of the Commission as in accelerating this uptake of digitalization for circularity.
Before I do that, I just wanted to come back to the blockchain. So I wanted to say that we do have, and we're building a Europe-wide blockchain infrastructure, which is mostly based on permission-based, because we still see a role for permission-based infrastructure among identified or authenticated economic actors that want to share data. I understand Mesbah's point about and I very much agree on the open data and open standards, basically open standards to go to the data spaces that we build. So this is it's a really complex discussion. I don't want to really confuse people, but the data spaces is really the next frontier that we need to get it right, because we're talking about trillions of products. Trillions of products. Of course, not everyone, not the smallest one, don't really need product passport, because the footprint of the data behind may be bigger than the product itself. But there are other issues like digital twin of things, digital twin of buildings and bridges and power plants, that we trying to kind of promote as a technology that would not only help the design, but would also help the predictive maintenance, follow the product, and predict in a way. So what can happen, and then make sure that it actually recycles back. And this digital twin, and there was a question in the chat, we actually applying to the city environment as a whole. And our new project goes even bolder, and we have a new initiative on digital twin of the earth, watching from extreme weathers to land management to ocean health to coastal regions to cities. So we have just launched a huge initiative that basically is based on the satellite imaging, but will come and bring the data from our economy and our society data, whatever we want to measure. So the digital twin as technology is something to be promoted. Now, there is a dark side to ICT. ICT today, depending on the estimates, let's say it's close to 4% of total emissions. So not yet the biggest culprit. I mean, there are worse than that. But the trajectory is something that we need to watch. So we need to watch the energy consumption of the ICT, because we will really deploy ICT. You have not seen anything yet. I mean, we are just in the beginning of deployment of ICT. And I put in the chat what we expect to happen with the connectivity and the smart IoT devices. That will be much more than what we normally think as bad thing, which is our mobiles. So the order of magnitude will grow. And we will go to zettabytes and whatever bytes of data that will circulate, and that has a footprint, and the footprint is energy consumption. And there we have a progress. We just committed this spring to make our data centers climate neutral by 2030, to make our telecoms more green, and to make sure that they give to customers a basic environmental footprint of their service. So if I watch Netflix on my mobile, I will actually see what is my footprint as a consumer. We really believe that we need to give transparency and trusted green estimates to consumers, because, as we said, and that's also part of the chat, consumers are a big part of it. But what I'm trying to say, we should not make consumers the only guilty ones of climate change. Okay, that's right. What my purpose was. Consumers are basically sometimes, they have limited choices, and there are some choices they cannot make. And that's why let's don't take the focus from where the responsibility is, and that's on our political leaders and on the economy business models as they are set up, the financial incentives. Instead of valorizing just the financial capital, we should valorize natural capital and human capital that we're trying. So that is the big systemic discussion, that consumer alone cannot just change everything. So coming back, there is the energy consumption of ICT, and there is a material consumption of ICT. If I had to choose, I would focus on the material. That's why the work of Mesbah and of Anirudha is very important, because if I had to choose, there is a clash between policy objective and a economy as it's running today. Economy runs today on more is more. Quantity-driven profit. More mobiles are sold, more money I make. More pesticides I sell, more money I make. More cars I sell, more money I make. In order to change that, to go to more circular and sustainable business models, people should not care about pesticides. They should care about health of their plant. They should not care about car. They should care about their mobility. They should not care about bulbs. They should care about getting light service. And this needs ICT, needs data, needs situational awareness, if you know what I mean. If I am, as a manufacturer, I have situational awareness, I will go much beyond what you call extended producer responsibility. I go and move to a higher order concept, which I call producer's ownership. I own the product. I will let it go through, and I will make sure that I design it in a way that when it comes back to me, it will not cost me a lot of money to recycle it, to dismantle it, or to purify it, or whatever. So for example, red ink on plastic bottles is really difficult to get. I, as manufacturer, will be incentivized to make sure I avoid red ink. I mean, if we go to details now. But right. This type of a concept is only enabled if I have situational awareness. That means data, real life connections to people, and blockchain for very specific authentication reasons, not privacy reasons. And that's what Mesbah explained very importantly. There is an authentication that I want to trust that information cannot be changed. But of course, it carries the problem of once there is a data on the blockchain, the right to forgotten is gone, because it'll be there forever. I just need to put another chain on another block to kind of say the previous one was wrong. So there are many discussion points. All I wanted to say that we are here to interact. This is not a session that you will cover all the details, but it's good to see what the people's worries are, and I will follow up with some of the speakers, of course, afterwards. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ilias. And I'm particularly glad you touched upon, using digital to sort of, not just build over what exists as business as usual, but to provide access over ownership and moving towards dematerialization. That hadn't come up so far in our discussion, but I think that's sort of one of the brightest spots of being able to use digital technologies for accelerating the circular economy transition. I think we're going to have to wrap up very, very quickly. I'm going to ask Naren to just put up a feedback form. We are actually nearing the end of our series. We have 2 panel discussions more, but we'd love to have your feedback to see if we're doing a good job. And and also feel free to email me or Reva if you have specific thoughts or areas you want to explore further. And I think I just want to ask our panelists, to maybe just sum it up for us in a minute each as to where to from here. Like, what is the one thing or the 2 things that we really need to do to accelerate this adoption of digital tech for circularity? We've covered a lot of points, so I'm only going to give you a minute each to do that. And bonus points for being shorter. Anirudha, do you want to begin?
Sure. So I think, strengthening EPR law, to me, EPR has caused the disruption to the waste space in India. Just, the same impact that demonetization did to fintech. So I think strengthening that for India will really be important.
Okay, thank you, Anirudha. Nina, maybe over to you.
I've been sitting and listening to everyone's input. I kind of want to connect to the whole panel, everyone in this panel afterwards in this conversation. But I would say from a brand perspective, it's really important with collaboration, as mentioned before, even if we were to drive change to impact the climate goals. The second part would be actually starting and adopting the solutions and see how it fits and look into how you can scale it up in your organization.
Right. Thank you so much, Nina. I think the connection was a little bit off. I couldn't hear particularly well. I hope the rest of you were able to. But Mesbah, maybe over to you for your quick sort of final thoughts on this.
Yeah, it was great meeting you all, and I think the conversation has just started. At least that's the feeling that I got here. And I just want to iterate what I said already. Blockchain is not going to help everything, and there is no point in manufacturing sustainably if you can't prove it.
Okay, Stefan.
It's a very interesting discussion indeed, and yes, in a nutshell, systemic challenges require systemic solutions, which means policy intervention. So there is a strong, big role of policymakers in creating regulations, but also to facilitate partnerships and to lead the way, create level playing fields that can then facilitate this transition. We also need industry on board, meaning that there should be a business case wherever possible to enable this transition to a circular economy, coupled with greater public awareness. But then also this, all of this applies for the development and deployment of digital solutions and use of data to support circular economy. Very broadly, because I mean, of course, even 1 hour won't be enough to go into touch upon every single segment of this.
Definitely.
But yes, thank you for a very interesting event and discussion.
Thank you, Stefan. Over to you, Ilias, if you have any final thoughts for us to wrap up here. You're muted.
Wanted to make sure that the aftertaste is not that this is a legal and a regulatory problem. It's a big industrial problem that we need to take together with the policymakers and the industry. We need to create a condition where all these data exchanges and smart applications to change to less materialized economy. for sure. We need to get there, but let's make sure that we do it in a way that we're not creating a next generation waste and e-waste. It has to be scalable, it has to be open, because whatever we start scaling, and because the green is pushing us to do hasty decisions, because we feel the pressure, we may sometimes go into this kind of a green dictatorship. Let's do quickly, and I don't care, and we have to do it because, and then we find ourselves, oops, victorious retreat. Let's go back and let's do it again. So let's make sure that it's thought through. It's not only policymakers. It's lawyers are not the answer to everything. Industry knows much better sometimes than policymakers, and I'm just one of those. To what needs to be done. So it has to be real dialogue between the three policymakers, industry, consumers to get there. So let's don't rush and make sure that we don't build waste of next generation.
Thank you so much, Ilias. Since I asked our panelists to wrap up, half my job is sort of done, but I'm going to try to do sort of my own 1-minute wrap up. We heard from two entrepreneurs in the room, Mesbah and Anirudha, and Anirudha specifically about how you're contextualizing some of your solutions to India. I think the DRS work is pretty fascinating, and I hope it gets somewhere very quickly. Mesbah, loved your solutioning, and I still don't understand the technology, but that you're already addressing the data privacy concerns, which is something a lot of other blockchain solution providers are starting to grapple with. So I think that's been great, and good luck with a lot of these collaborative initiatives and the open standards that you're trying to develop. I think that's going to be pretty monumental in moving the entire circular economy conversation and actions forward. Ilias, it was great to hear from you about the data space, the other side of the product passports. How do you manage that, and how do you sort of govern that in a productive manner for all the stakeholders involved? That was fascinating to hear. Stefan, thank you so much. I think your work is really extensive. I mean, it's sort of like this brilliant overview of what's happening with digital tech and circular economy in the EU. So that was very comprehensive, and I particularly loved hearing from both you and Ilias on the, sort of some of the challenges with the devices themselves. How digitalization can in itself be unsustainable, and how should we try and address that? And Nina, I think very great points on the standardization of data and the role that you as H&M play in some of these collaborative initiatives, and how you're trying to set some of those industry standards. Absolutely brilliant to hear from all of you. I think for anyone remaining in the room and you'd like to take a picture with us, we'd like to very quickly do that. That seems to be the part that I very often forget. So can you turn your cameras on so we can get a quick picture of everyone? And while I wait for everyone to turn the cameras on, because I realize this takes like a minute for everyone, but as I do that, just a quick reminder to follow the EU-REI page on social media, and to make sure that you're signed up on our sign-up sheets to get information about what is coming. I hope you've learned a lot about digital tech. This is just the very first conversation, really, and we hope to have many more of these conversations delving into some of the details in the coming months. And thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much to the EU-REI team for making this possible, and thank you very much to our panelists for giving us this great overview in what is actually a very challenging topic to discuss within the context of like an hour and a half. Wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. And, we're available if you want to talk to us after and point specific questions to us as well.
Thank you, Pavi, for running it over to make it happen. It was fun.
Thank you, Ilias.
Thank you for having me, and hopefully till next time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Touch.
Bye, Anirudha.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.